This is the stage where you have a relationship partner. We call it in the business what? A joint venture agreement. That you have pulled this together and y'all are moving forward and y'all are gonna make some things happen. And you're excited about making some things happen because you're excited about them because you put that RFP out, you read through all those RFPs, you've gone through those interviews, and you pulled this one out of the pot. So here's the question I want to start out with you. And Reverend Silver, we're going to start with you. Since you've reached the commitment stage and joined forces with a development partner for your project, tell us about the process that got you to that place with your joint venture agreement. What was it that got you to the place that made you say, we can put an RFP out and we're ready to do this because we know now that we can go forward?
Thank you, Reverend Williams. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marvin Silver. I serve as the Associate Conference Minister with the Central Atlantic Conference of the United Church of Christ, representing our more than 55 local churches across the DMV area. And we are in a very excited and unique relationship with one of our local churches, Lincoln Congregational Temple, one of our historic African-American churches in Washington, D.C., located on 11th and R Streets, to redevelop their property, to look forward to helping them imagine, but no more than just imagine, but to live into the fullness of their legacy. They are a congregation that ended their operations a few years ago. And Reverend Williams, we are, I would say, to answer your questions, we are close to that RFP. We got the RFP in the cloud, waiting to be released, but we had to take care of some very important work first, and that is to get a commitment agreement with our local church. We are a judicatory body that works with our local churches across the region, and we don't own the property. The local church owns the property. So in our conversations and work with them as moving forward with their legacy work, we had to come to an agreement with them as an autonomous organization, as a local church, to have an understanding of the work that we would do as a conference, both to take on the property and help them to live into that legacy that they would hope to see their building be served for affordable housing use as well as community use. I am happy to say that just 2 weeks ago, we've come to an agreement on the language around our memorandum of an agreement, and I think the ink is being put on that agreement right now, and we will be in a position, hopefully in the coming weeks, late spring, to issue that RFP and move forward with the next stage in the process to enter into an agreement with a development partner. But we wanted to be sure that we were clear with our local church that this is what we agreed to do. They wanted to be sure that we would be clear about the work that needed to be done, that we would meet some agreements. And then we also had our agreements as well in terms of wanting to make sure that the project would not harm the organizational capacity and financial capacity of the conference as a whole. So once we've had those conversations and come to agreement on the paper, we are now excited that we can hopefully move forward in late spring with that RFP. But it's in the cloud and ready to go.
Well, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. Pastor Rioland.
Good afternoon, all. I am Kenneth Rioland, Jr., senior pastor of the Paramount Baptist Church, Southeast Ward 8 in the Washington Highlands area. We do have a development partner, and the way that we got to the path to that was not only being a part of this cohort, learning, in the words of Reverend Joe Williams, learning to be conversive in the language, but we had a development consultant. Shout out to Ms. Deborah Stevenson in the building. That was our DC and helped us understand what it took, the specificities that we needed to get to before we were ready for a development partner. We did not put an RFP on the street, we put an RFQ on the street.
Oh, do tell.
The Q stands for qualifications, and so we didn't just ask for proposals, we asked for the developers to tell us who they were, why they were qualified for our unique project. We narrowed it down to about 4, and with Deborah's assistance and our committee, our group, we went through and we selected. We weren't selected. We selected our development partner. To this date, we have an LOI.
Wait a minute, you said you selected.
We did select because we learned in our cohort that we have the asset. There is no development without the land. And so we didn't go in asking. We went in understanding that we were the commodity, and they needed us as much as we needed them, and so we're partners. We got these four proposals, if you will, and we sorted through them and made a decision on the one that most aligned with our vision. And so there's an LOI that's in existence that came with a check to let us know that they were serious about this relationship. We are at the MOU stage, and we'll see where we go from there. If I can, I will just say that one of the things we did learn in this cohort is to be unapologetic about your vision and understanding that you're in the driver's seat. You don't have to apologize for that.
That was for free, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Pastor Isaac.
Good afternoon. First, before I say something about the selection process, I'd like to just say that we are also at Ward 8 of the street. We own a city block, and our original proposal was to develop the whole city block. It was only by the grace of God and the leadership of God that we have now tweaked that proposal, where the church, which is 94 years old, continue to be a church freestanding, so we won't have the issue that some people have about, affecting the home base. First, and also it's owned debt-free. So I also thought that was a good decision because I didn't pay for that. Our foreparents did, and we wanted to honor that. At the same time, the other end of the block is a 14-unit apartment building that I proudly say that we bought because a Black Baptist church in Southeast gave us a $75,000 down payment check. And that also originally was going to still stay in the project when the church came out, but because of the new DHCD RFP, which preferred new construction over renovation construction, we took that out as well. And I just say that because, stay open, because now we're in a much better place. The church is free and standing. The apartment building that we already owned was free and standing, and now we're developing in the middle of the block. When it comes to the question of selecting a developer, it's interesting. We weren't, and I've been around, David said, since the very beginning, but we didn't do an RFP or RFQ. I basically sent a note, and Deborah Stevenson was at the table with me, so I had some help. But we sent a note to 8 developer friends who I knew. And I said, we want to do development. Everybody answered and said, we're glad to do it. Work with you. It was during COVID as well. I said also, we want to make sure that we are fully competent. The church receives the full value, the appraised value of the land. Now that seems to be very simple, even though I can tell you now of a church that within the last year in Shaw who has sold their property without doing that process. But we wanted full value of the land. And of course the development partner said yes to that. I said, second of all, we wanted to be in the new entity, in the joint venture, we want to be 51% owner of that entity. They also said yes to that, which sounds like a big ask, but DC law encourages that happens, so that wasn't a big ask. The third thing I said is that we want to participate in the developer's fee. We want a minimum of 30% of the developer's fee. That list of 8 went down to 2. So I just kind of indicate that to say that what I've learned from that is 2 things. One, we almost don't know what questions to ask. And second of all, that after you do the vision, which is the most important thing, Pastor Ken, I appreciate you for being there, know what you want to do. Don't let anybody else come and tell us what they want to do. The second most important thing is then who are you going to do it with? It's just like a marriage, and you wouldn't want to be unequally yoked. As Pastor Rioland said, that we got the land, you can find developers up and down the street who want to do the deal, but you want to get in bed with a person who you're comfortable with. Thank you.
So you raised, look, y'all go ahead and give him a hand, because he was preaching just now, wasn't he? He was preaching just now. So, but you raised up something. So the level of detail to this RFQ, RFP, RCC, no, I'm only kidding. The RFP and RFQ. But the level of detail that you need to put into that. You know, so Reverend Silver, you got a different unique situation. You got a congregation that's closed, the conference is in there, you got to get an MOU together. But what is the level of detail that needs to go into this whole RFQ process for the internal team?
Well, there's a lot of details. We've been spending a lot of time over the last couple of months with our development consultant, putting together some criteria for a potential development partner. And we have a set of criteria based upon sort of threshold requirements, things that we wanted to make sure.
Like what? Give me, what criteria? Like what?
Yeah, so let me run down the list here. I figured you was going to ask me that question. So, for instance, we want to make sure that, you know, at minimum, let's see here.
That's all right. While you get it, I'm going to give you some come back to you.
Sure.
You mentioned it. You were talking about it.
Let me just say, after you pick your development partner, the next most important thing is the operating agreement. Mm-hmm. It's not an MOU.
Right.
It's an operating agreement that spells out the nuts and the bolts and the nature of the relationship between the parties. And let me just say this, and I'm saying this is a parenthetical. As I tell most pastors, the most complicated real estate transaction that most of us are going to be engaged in is buying a house. Mm-hmm. Residential cannot even compare with commercial. Commercial can't even compare with development. And affordable housing of the types of deals we're talking about is an altogether different animal as well. And most times we're getting in bed with people who do it for a living. Mm-hmm. And that operating agreement, I just close with this one example. And one of the catch-alls that I won't even do this. I can do it, though. I mean, I'm old enough, I can do what I want now. When we went down the list, glory to God, hallelujah, where is that? Of Living Word, which is in the house, of Bible Way, which is in the house, that the director Green talked about, Israel, whose person we in most of those cases, folk don't even want to talk to their development partner.
That's right.
Today.
So that's the whole nother conversation. Mm-hmm. And we could do that, but we're not going to do that right now.
Okay, sorry.
That's right. I'm going to pull that back. But the detail to paying attention to that document of the level of detail, because Reverend Isaac said something. That operating agreement is the nuts and bolts. Mm-hmm. But if you're putting together a weak document to request, you're not showing who you are. So what's the level of detail that your internal team, well, along with your development consultant, has to pay attention to?
Yeah, I think we can't speak strongly enough about how important the details are and where the devil lies in the details. But to what Pastor Isaac said, who I defer to having all knowledge, but you can't know it all, and so it's important to have help. Mm-hmm. It's important to have and listen to your development consultant. It's important to have others on your team. It's important, as we learn, to have your own counsel in this process. And let me say this to pastors. I learned very early on from Reverend Williams, shout out to Pastor Lionel Edmonds, who told me to be at every meeting. But I am not quarterbacking this effort. There's a chairman of the development team at our church because I can't quarterback that and this. And so you gotta, as pastors, you need others that are engaged, but you need to read everything. You need to be as conversive as you possibly can be. But there's a lot of icing. If you're not careful, you'll get drawn in by the icing and not have any cake underneath.
Reverend Silver, so what were some things that you all were specific?
So for our project, we wanted to be clear that we wanted to maintain land ownership. We wanted to proposals must propose concepts that consider the need and potential impact of the project of the local community, in particular as it relates to housing. A minimum income affordable housing units at 80% of the area median income was important for our local church. And then again, to repeat, for our conference, we wanted to make sure that financial projections demonstrate that the project will produce sufficient revenue to ensure long-term operational stability without the need for identifying ongoing subsidies. Again, we wanted to make sure as a conference that this was a project that was going to maintain itself and that we didn't have to constantly pour dollars into it.
Now, you raised up something. I'm going to make this the last question, so to speak, but it's going to be the last question for this panel. I want to be clear. But so you said that some of the development partnerships that have taken place, the folk don't want to talk with their developers right now, the partners right now. I hear what you said, but let me ask you this question. Then what are the key communication tools that you need to have in place to make sure you're maintaining an agreement that's going to give you satisfaction, not just in getting the deal done, but throughout the lifetime of the deal?
And Pastor said that, I heard him say in the interview, he said that it's not, we say this, often 3 people have said it today, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So we got to have that perspective as we approach the table. But let me just use this as an illustration to make one point. In most operating agreements, the can gets kicked down the path a while to say you have the right of first refusal. In other words, most of these things, that there are tax credits involved, there is this compliance period, and at the end of the compliance period, you can buy your land back, or you can do some things. That kind of gives us some sense of guarantee. Yep. Well, first of all, I've investigated now 3 or 4 what I call ROFAs, R-O-F-A, rights of first refusal, and most of the times, the entity that has entered into the operating agreement on behalf of the church is not even in good standing with the city. I just want to get out of the idea that we're not paying attention to the details there with regard to not even that how can I prepare myself to be able to exercise it even if I have it. It just gets to be a question where people kind of go their various ways for whatever reasons.
Rioland?
I can't emphasize enough the importance of humility, making sure we don't enter. Pastor Isaac said it. The level of complexity that these deals come with, unless you live, breathe, eat that stuff every day, you can't know it all. So it's not just a development consultant. It's an owner's rep. It's an attorney. It's making sure that you've done everything you can to ensure the safety, not only of the deal, but of the legacy that comes with this project. There are people that have invested. In my case, Paramount has been trying to build for the better part of 15 to 20 years. And it is critical and vital that we dot every I and cross every T to make sure that we have something that these people that have invested can be proud of and that is sustainable for generations to come.
Has your outlook changed as it relates to how you see yourself now in the deal because of your experience in your own work, your experience through this cohort? Has your outlook changed how you see yourself? I know your outlook has changed. I've been knowing you for 20-something years, and you've changed so much. I just want to know if you're all right. But has your outlook changed? How you see yourself in the deal, Reverend Silver?
I think for us as a conference, working with our local churches, many of which who are on that sort of pathway towards legacy, closing up shop, this work with our Congregation League and Congregational Temple has given us sort of a model to say, yeah, we can do this. We can work with our local churches at a point of legacy and say, you know what, it's not just enough for us anymore to say, you know what, this is what you should do with your building. You should take your building, sell the assets, and put it in a legal trust, and then we'll take that and run a grant program to support ongoing ministry across the conference. No, we want to see if there's a real opportunity for us to reimagine ministry at that site, maintain ownership at that site, whether that ministry and mission is a new church or where it sort of builds upon the history of the United Church of Christ by reimagining what a New American Missionary Association could look like in the context of local communities and how we address particular needs that are right there in those locations. So we have other churches across our conference that we can do pretty much a similar work with. Of course, we don't have all of the capacity to be able to do that on a regular basis, but through our partners with the United Church of Christ, Church Building and Loan Fund, and others, we believe there's an opportunity for us to do that where strategically possible. So, yeah.
Rioland?
Got to be careful putting a preacher in front of a microphone. I think I entered this thinking more like Moses. I think I see myself now more as Joshua and Caleb, because I've had an opportunity to go and see what's possible. It's not about being in charge. Yes, do I sit in a place of visionary? I do, but I'm able to go and come meet with Veronica Harrison over here and talk about the good, bad, and the ugly and take that back to my team. I'm able to call Pastor Isaac or talk to others that my team is not necessarily connected to, and then come back and have the nuts and bolts put in place. And so what I have learned more than anything else is you don't know how much you don't know.
Elder Statesman?
Yeah, I think what has happened to me, and I thank Dexter today, Pastor Nuttall, for reminding us that the earth is the Lord's, and also that, as he said, that the Bible has much to say about real estate. I mean, it's about land and the ownership of land, and I think, Pastor K, what I like is Joshua, like Joshua 13 and 14, where I think the word of inheritance is probably there over 20 times.
Yes, sir.
Right? And as Joshua's summation was, give me this mountain. So I think that with regard to me, as one who, let me just say, as one who lives today in the house that my single mother bought on Capitol Hill, because of the importance of real estate as a process of generational wealth. And one who was that, kind of was led to go undergrad in urban planning, get a broker's degree and all of that, but now realize that I think that we, especially as African-American people, this is a question that we have to handle skillfully and with good stewardship, is my calling and purpose in this season of my life.
You all are legacy builders. You're leaving a legacy. Enterprise is glad to be in partnership with you. Thank you for your time.